Ever catch yourself, like, knee deep in those online parenting forums at 2:00 a.m.?
Oh, tell me you haven't been there.
It's me! All right, well, picture this. You're scrolling, right? Endless articles. Each one promises to be the magic solution, for whatever your kiddo's going through that week. And it's like 1 minute you're researching the best sleep training methods, and then bam, you're suddenly an expert in, I don't know, toddler temper tantrums. It's
Oh,
a
yeah.
lot. Right. And the thing is, every parent, every caregiver, we all just want what's best. But finding the right support, it can feel impossible. So for this deep dive, we're doing something a little
A
different.
little different. How so?
Well, instead of adding to that mountain of parenting advice, we're tackling something that often gets, wow, kind of glossed over, I guess. Going deep on applied behavior analysis therapy, ABA. You've probably heard of it.
Definitely heard of it. But honestly, I think a lot of people, they hear ABA therapy and they kind of shut down. It can feel intimidating, clinical even.
Right. And there's a lot of misinformation out there, too. So we're going straight to the source using information from an organization called Cheap ABA. They're doing some really interesting work to make this type of therapy more accessible. And we're going to unpack exactly what that looks like. So are you ready to decode ABA with me?
Let's do it. I'm all for demystifying things, especially when it comes to supporting kids and families.
Music to my ears. So let's start with the basics. What exactly is ABA therapy?
So ABA, at its core, it's about understanding. It's about looking beyond a behavior, especially a challenging one, and figuring out the why behind it. Instead of just seeing a kid who's, say, having a meltdown in the middle of the grocery store, we want to understand what's motivating that behavior. What's going on for that child in that moment?
That makes so much sense. It's like instead of just putting a Band-Aid on the behavior, you're trying to figure out what's causing the cut in the first place.
Exactly. And then, once we understand the why, we can start to teach new, positive ways to interact with the world. ABA is all about giving kids the tools they need to communicate their needs, express their feelings, and navigate their environment in a way that works for them and for everyone around them.
So it's not about just stopping bad behavior. It's about teaching different, more effective ways to communicate or get those needs met, right?
100%. We're talking about replacing those challenging behaviors with ones that are more adaptive, more functional. And a big part of that is understanding what we call reinforcement.
Okay, reinforcement. That's one of those words, right? It sounds very
Yeah.
therapist-y. Can you break that down for us?
Absolutely. So reinforcement, put simply, is anything that makes the behavior more likely to happen again.
Makes sense. So like if my kiddo asks for a cookie politely and I say, sure, you can have a cookie, that's me reinforcing the asking politely behavior, right?
Exactly. You're more likely to hear those pleases and thank yous next time. But here's the thing. Reinforcement can be tricky because it can also be negative. Like imagine a parent who gives in to a tantrum just to get their kid to, I don't know, stop screaming in Target. Right. But what they're accidentally doing is reinforcing that tantrum behavior. They're teaching their kid, hey, if you scream loud enough, you'll get what you want.
That's a great point. So how does Cheap ABA, this organization we're looking at, how do they approach this whole idea of understanding behavior and using reinforcement? Because from what I've seen on their website, they seem to be really big on individualized approaches.
They are.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that really sets them apart. They're all about meeting each child where they're at. They talk a lot about the importance of building a foundation for independence, teaching essential life skills,
Yeah.
and not just in a clinical setting, but in a way that translates to real life.
So we're talking about things like communication, social skills. What were some of the other areas they highlighted?
Let's see, they mentioned daily living tasks, like getting dressed or brushing teeth, which can be huge for building confidence and self-sufficiency. They also talked about play skills, which are so essential for social development and honestly, just for kids being kids and having fun.
Absolutely. And I noticed they emphasize generalizing these skills, which I think is huge.
Huge is an understatement. It's one thing to learn a skill in a therapy room, but the real magic happens when a child can use it out in the real world in different environments with different people.
Totally. And it sounds like Cheap ABA gets that. I loved that example they gave about using video modeling to teach social skills. Something about using a child's favorite cartoon character to, like, teach them about taking turns.
Oh yeah, they're big on that. Because think about it, kids learn by watching, right? Especially when it's something they're interested in.
That's so smart. It's like, what kid doesn't love watching cartoons?
Exactly. And the visual element can be so powerful for some kids, especially those who might struggle with traditional teaching methods.
Okay, that is seriously cool. And it speaks to this idea of making therapy engaging, even fun, which let's face it, not always the first word that comes to mind when you think of therapy.
For sure. And that actually ties into another thing that really impressed me about cheap ABA, their emphasis on flexible settings.
Oh, yeah. Tell me more about that.
So they offer therapy in a variety of environments, a child's home, at school, even in one of their centers. It's all about finding what works best for each individual child and family. Because let's be real, some kids thrive in a more structured clinical environment, but for others, that could feel really overwhelming or intimidating. Being in a familiar setting, surrounded by familiar people, it can make a world of difference.
Totally. And isn't that ultimately what it's all about? It's about understanding each child's unique needs and tailoring the approach to fit them.
100%.
Hmm.
It's not one size fits all, which
Mm.
I think is something that cheap ABA really emphasizes.
So for anyone listening who's thinking, okay, this all sounds great, but where do I even begin? What advice would you give them? What questions should they be asking potential providers as they start to explore this for their own families?
That's such an important question because finding the right fit is crucial. Don't be afraid to ask a lot of questions. What's their team's experience with ABA? How do they approach individualization? What kind of support do they offer families throughout the process? Because it's a journey,
Right.
and you want to feel confident in the people you're working with.
That's such a good point. This whole deep dive, it's really got me thinking differently about ABA therapy. It's more than just a set of techniques, isn't it?
It's about so much more. It's about understanding, empowering, and celebrating each child's unique strengths and abilities. And remember, this is just the tip of the iceberg.
You said it.
Keep asking questions, keep digging for information, and most importantly, trust your instincts. You know your child best.
So true. Well, on that note, I think we've done our job for today.
Mission accomplished, or should I say, deep dive completed.
Exactly. We've taken a deep dive into cheap ABA and hopefully given you a lot to think about. Remember, everyone's journey is different, but knowledge is power. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
See you then.